Let's start with a few minutes of silence to settle down our minds and get into a positive state of mind for what we are about to do. So bring your awareness into your body, sitting here in this place. Your breath flowing in and out in a natural rhythm. And bring your awareness into the present moment. Leave aside thoughts of the past, earlier today, or any other time in the past, as well as the future, later today, or any other time in the future. You can always pick up those thoughts again later, but for now, decide to leave them aside so that your mind can be right here in the present moment, present place. And now let's see if we can have a really positive, altruistic intention or motivation for being in this class. So we're learning about teachings that were given by the Buddha. And when the Buddha taught, he did so with compassion for all living beings. He understood why there is suffering in the world and why there's suffering in the lives of each individual being. He understood the causes of that suffering and really wanted to release all beings from their suffering and from the causes of suffering so that it would never happen again. And so he taught with that intention in mind, wanting to help all of us be free of suffering and its causes. So see if you can have a similar motivation in your own mind as you learn about these teachings, that you would like to bring about an end to suffering and its causes, both for yourself and for other people, other beings. And that is your reason for learning about these teachings. Okay, so I hope everyone is doing well. And last week we were going through the 4 attributes or characteristics of the first of the 4 noble truths, true dukkha, true suffering. So we covered the first 2 of these attributes, which are impermanence and unsatisfactoriness. So today, let's continue looking at the second 2, the last 2. So in your book, we're on the bottom of page 14, the last paragraph. So these last 2 attributes are difficult I'll talk about them today, and then in the meditation for Wednesday, um, I'll lead a meditation on these to help you understand them a bit better. So, so once again, we're looking at true dukkha, or true suffering, and that includes our own body and our mind, as well as things in the world around us, whatever arose from karma and afflictions, delusions. So that's generally what is meant by true dukkha. But we're mainly focusing here on our own body and mind. This is what we have with us 24 hours a day, from the beginning of our life to the end of our life. We have these what are called aggregates in Buddhism, but basically it just means this body-mind combination. So this is an example of dukkha, or suffering, according to Buddhism. And we're trying to understand that better by looking at these 4 characteristics. So the first characteristic is impermanent. That's not too difficult to understand. Our body and mind are constantly going through changes. They don't stay the same from one moment to the next. Even though that's very, very profound, it's relatively easy to understand. The second of the 4 attributes is unsatisfactoriness, which means that we cannot get real, genuine, long-lasting happiness and pleasure from our aggregates, partly because they're impermanent. I mean, the fact that they're impermanent, they're changing all the time, they're getting older, like our body's getting older every minute, every second, every day, every month, every year, and it's, wearing down, falling apart. And so the amount of happiness and pleasure we can get with respect to our body is limited, very, very limited, and not fully satisfying. And instead, there's lots of problems, many, many problems with this body-mind combination. So it's not really satisfying. And so now the third of the 4 attributes is empty. This is a little harder to understand, but let's see if we can. So it says in the book, the aggregates are empty because they lack a permanent, unitary, and independent self. So there's no self that has those qualities, permanent, unitary, and independent. Okay, so let's read that paragraph and then I'll talk about it. The aggregates being empty refutes the permanent, unitary, independent self, or Atman, that's the Sanskrit term, as conceived by the non-Buddhists. So at the time of the Buddha, and before the Buddha, and since the Buddha, there are many people who believe in this kind of a self or a soul that has those qualities. So what they mean is permanent. Permanent here means the self is eternal and does not change from one life to the next. So I think this is similar with like the Abrahamic religions, like Judaism, Christianity, Islam. I was raised Catholic, and we were taught that we have a soul, and the soul continues to exist after we die. Our body dies and gets buried or burned or whatever, but our soul goes on, continues to exist. And if we've been good, it will go to heaven. If we've been bad, it will go to hell, and it will remain there forever, for all eternity. And there's also this idea that the soul is like the real me. And so if I go to heaven, hopefully that's what will happen. I will go to heaven and not hell. But if I go to heaven, then it will still be me, like the me of this life will be there in heaven, and I will meet my loved ones. You know, my mother and my father and my grandparents. They will be there too. You know, just like they were while we were alive, and all my friends and other people that I knew during this lifetime, they will be there in heaven, and we will be reunited. We will all be together again forever in the presence of God and enjoying great happiness. So you see, there's this idea, there's a real me now in this life with this body and mind, and that real me, real I, will continue to exist afterwards, after death in heaven. And I'll have my real mother, my real mother will be there, my father will be there, my grandparents, and so on and so forth. So this sense of an I that stays the same in this lifetime and also afterwards in the next world. So that's the sense of permanent. It means it's the same from this life until afterwards. The next term is unitary, means not made of parts. So I guess that is what the non-Buddhists in India believed, that you can't divide up this soul or this Atman into parts. It's just one whole monolithic thing. And then independent in this context means not depending on causes and conditions. So it's, again, I guess this is what the non-Buddhists believed, that this self or soul is independent of other things, independent of causes and conditions. It doesn't get affected by causes and conditions. So this is the belief. This is the belief of these non-Buddhist schools of philosophy and religion. So it goes on to say, such a self or soul has a nature that is entirely different from that of the aggregates. So it's not the same as our body and mind, because obviously when we die, this body-mind combination is left behind, but this soul continues to exist. So it's different, it's separate. It is forever unchanged, monolithic, all-pervasive, and completely separate from conditioned phenomena. The aggregates, in contrast, change, consist of parts, and are influenced by causes and conditions. They cannot be such a self. Okay, so this is, the Buddha learned about this idea of a self or a soul or an Atman when he was brought up in India. So he was taught this idea, but then when he meditated, trying to find the solution to the problem of suffering, he realized, he looked into himself, into his aggregates, body and mind, and discovered he couldn't find that kind of a self or a soul, that it just doesn't exist. There's nothing within our body and mind that you can point to and say that is this permanent, unitary, independent self. So he realized that it's empty, meaning it doesn't exist. It's just a fabrication of the mind, a mental creation, but it doesn't really exist. Like a unicorn, for example, people make up these different kinds of beings, like a unicorn and, a horse with a horn in its head, or horses that can fly around. So people invent these ideas, but if you try to find that kind of animal anywhere in the world, then you cannot find such a thing. So it's just sort of a fabrication of the mind. So this is what the Buddha himself discovered, and he taught this, but it's up to us to investigate and see if it's, what's right, what's true. Is there this kind of self or soul or not? So again, he didn't want us to just blindly believe what he said, but that we should investigate this to see if it's true or not. Also, what the Buddha realized was that if we believe in this kind of a self, a permanent, unitary, independent self, then this leads to lots of problems. People become attached to their own self, and then attached to whatever belongs to the self, like my friends, my family, my property, my land, my money, my reputation, my success, and so on. People get all attached to things belonging to the self, and then that leads to unwholesome actions. It leads to hostility, anger, hatred towards anyone that threatens your own self and what belongs to you. And then we create karma, we do unwholesome actions, and then that is what leads us to experience suffering and take rebirth again and again. And so this isn't just a philosophical idea that we believe in or not believe in, but it's something pertinent to our whole existence of, being happy or being unhappy, of being imprisoned in samsara or being free of samsara. So it's an important question. What is the self? What is the I? And now, in case you're thinking about this, I mean, Buddhism does say that we are reborn. When we die, we don't just completely go out of existence, but there's something that takes rebirth. And this goes on and on, many lives. So isn't that a self or a soul? So no, it's not, because according to Buddhism, what it is that's reborn is not something permanent and unitary and independent, but rather some part of our mind, a subtle part of our mind, that doesn't die, continues to exist after we die, after our body dies. And that is what takes rebirth. So being mind, it's impermanent. It's changing all the time. So it's not a permanent self or soul. And it's not some kind of essence of who I am, my real me, my personality that will be in the next life, meeting the same people I knew during this lifetime and recognizing each other and saying, oh, it's so nice to see you again. So it's not like that. The mind, this part of the mind, takes a new body and has a whole new personality, new relationships, new identity, career, activities, and so on, everything new. Okay, so it's just some subtle part of our mind that goes to the next life and then develops a whole new sense of self or I. And it's not independent of causes and conditions. It's very much affected by causes and conditions, like our karma and our experiences. When we meet people, we interact with people, we learn from people. So all of those things condition our sense of self and our experiences. Okay, so that's just a little bit about that. And yeah, we'll have a chance to do meditation on it in your Wednesday class. But this idea of a permanent, unitary, independent self is not completely negative, because many people in the world do believe in that kind of self. People who follow religions such as Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and of course many of the Indian religions, they believe in that kind of a self. And based on that belief, they want to go to heaven. They want to meet their relatives and meet God and have a wonderful afterlife. And so because of that, then they do virtuous actions. They live ethically, they give, practice generosity, help others, and practice their religion very devoutly. So it's not that this belief is totally bad, totally wrong, because it can lead to happiness in this life and happiness in future lives. But from the Buddhist point of view, it doesn't help us get out of samsara. It's a cause to continue taking birth in samsara again and again and again. So if we want to attain liberation from samsara and not have to die and take rebirth anymore, then this is something we need to free ourselves from. And then the last sentence of that paragraph also says that this same idea or attribute of being empty also refutes the existence of an independent creator who is unchanging, monolithic, and unaffected by causes and conditions. So again, this is something many human beings believe in, that there's a creator, God or Yahweh or Allah or Brahma. He has different names, but it's basically the same idea, that there's this powerful being who created our world and created us and is kind of watching over us, and then also decides after we die what happens to us, where we go, and so forth. So according to Buddhism, there's no such creator. The world was not created by a single being who has these kind of qualities of being permanent or unchanging, monolithic, and not affected by causes and conditions. So that's that attribute. So we can investigate that, although it's not easy, it does take time, but something to think about. The next attribute, the last one, is top of page 15, number 4. The aggregates are selfless because they lack a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. Okay, so this is looking at another idea about self. I, who I am, what I am, how I exist. So let's read this and then look at it more carefully. If a self-sufficient, substantially existent person existed, it would be the same nature as the aggregates. Okay, so the previous one, the previous attribute, the permanent, unitary, independent self, that is something that is just invented by philosophers or religious people. It's an intellectually developed notion about the self or the I. But this one we're talking about now, it's got a lot of words to it. Self-sufficient, substantially existent person. This is actually something innate or instinctive, intuitive. It's inborn. All beings in samsara, within our mind, we all have this instinctive sense of this kind of a self, I, person. So it's with us when we're born. It's with us in our past lives. According to Buddhism, it's always been part of our mind, part of our experience, that we believe in this kind of a self. This is the one, you've probably heard it before, but it doesn't hurt to hear it again. This is the one that we feel as if there's something inside of us that is like the boss, like a boss or a CEO or a king or a president, something that's in charge, that's controlling, directing our body and mind. Okay, so it there's this kind of subtle feeling inside of us. There's an I that is living inside of this body and using this body to do things and using the mind to think and create and decide and so on and so forth. So it feels like there's an I that's directing the whole operation of our body and mind. So that's this one. And this kind of self is something that doesn't exist different from the body and mind, but it's the same nature, meaning it's somewhere within our body and mind. Okay, so it says, when we say I or my body and mind, we have the impression that there is a self who is the owner and controller of the body and mind. I mean, we do say that. We say, my body, right? As if there's an I that owns this body, yeah. Or we say, my mind, my thoughts, my feelings. So we're saying there's an I who is the owner of the thoughts and feelings in the mind. So it seems to be a little bit separate and in this position of owning and controlling. This I instructs the mind to think and the body to move. I am going to get out of bed. It's time to get up. I have to get out of bed. So there's a sense of an I that's making the body leave this warm, comfortable bed. Doesn't really want to get up, but I have to go. I have to go to work. Whereas we usually identify a person by seeing his body, hearing her speak, or thinking of her mind, a self-sufficient, substantially existent person could be identified without knowing any of the aggregates. Okay, so there's some discord between the way we usually react to ourselves and others and this sense of a real I. Like to be able to know another person, to know that Uri is there, for example. We have to see his body sitting there or standing there or walking or standing on his head or whatever. We have to see a body and then we can say, oh, that's Uri. Uri's over there. Or we have to hear the voice. If we can't see the person, but we can hear their voice on the other side of the wall, then we know, oh, that person is there. But in the case of this self-sufficient, substantially existent person, if we really investigate, that sense of self, it seems to be something that's a little bit different, a little bit separate from the body and mind. Yeah, it's able to kind of stand by itself, not totally separate, like, over there on the other side of the room. Somewhere inside, it feels like it's inside of the body and mind, somewhere inside, but still a little bit different, a little bit separate, like in this superior position, this ruling, controlling position. Okay, so this is subtle. This is kind of subtle, and it's something we need to investigate. And you probably have heard description of this, and you've probably done meditations on it, and you probably had lots of discussions about it. But anyway, according to Buddhism, according to Buddha's experience, this kind of self doesn't actually exist. But still, it's something we have to recognize, we have to identify and check for ourselves. Is there such a self or not? We have to look into our own experience. And
excuse me?
yeah, yes. Hello.
Can I ask something? Hi. Can I ask something?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure that we discussed it already, the subtle thing that you talk about. But so if there is something that control us, getting in the morning and do meditation and want this and not this and do spiritual things. So who is it?
Well, that's what we have to investigate. I mean, yeah, definitely. It feels like there is an I that makes decisions and that says, I want to be a psychologist, or I want to be a Buddhist, or I want to go here, I want to have a cup of coffee. It feels like there is an I that makes those kind of decisions and has those wishes and so on. And Buddhism is not denying our existence. Buddhism isn't saying, oh, you don't exist at all. There's nothing at all there. But it's just a question of what exactly is it? What is the I that exists and that makes decisions and that meditates and becomes enlightened? There is an I that becomes enlightened, but it's not that kind of an I. It's not this kind of an I that exists in that way as we imagine it. What we come to when we do this investigation, what the Buddha came to and what we're trying to come to is to think that there's just this body and mind. There's only these aggregates which are impermanent, changing all the time. There's nothing that's permanent and unchanging within us. And in relation to these aggregates, we simply use the term I, or whatever, in every language has its own word for the self. So in English we say I, and we have a name as well. Our parents give us a name, and so we go by that name. That's the name we have in our passport and so forth. So it's just a convention. It's just a convenient, conventional way of referring to this particular set of aggregates, this particular combination of body and mind. We just have a name for it, a label for it, and it's changing all the time. So,
maybe
as one of my teachers says, it exists, but it's almost as if it doesn't exist. It's almost non-existent. It's barely there. The I is barely there. Just labeled. You've probably heard that term before. Just labeled, just named. Not this big solid I, big ego that we normally feel. But I mean, this is, the topic of emptiness, and it's something very subtle, very deep, very difficult to understand. And it's not something we can answer just like that, but something we need to investigate, think about, meditate on.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
So maybe this I is a function. You can call it a function, something that, okay, we have a mind that help us thinking and talking and do things like this, and that's it. Kilo, we have a body that is a function. We have a mouth that is a function, and we have a mind that is a function. This what you mean?
They function, yes. Our mind functions, our body functions, our mouth functions. I mean, yeah, if you want to think of it that way. I guess the point is we're trying to investigate if our usual sense of I, we do have this instinctive feeling of an I, and it is a problem because if somebody insults us or they do something we don't like, it makes us unhappy, then our I can come up and become very powerful, and we can get angry, and we can even hurt people, do negative things because of attachment to our sense of I. And so believing in a real independent or controlling kind of I gets us into trouble, gets us into problems. And in fact, all the suffering, all the problems in the world, all the wars and the violence and the terrorist actions and murders and so forth. So all of these are because of people believing in a real I, and then getting afflicted, having afflictive emotions based on this sense of a self or an I. So this is what we're investigating. We're looking into that to see if that sense of I is realistic or not. And yeah, it's a long-term process to investigate this. You must have heard teachings before on the topic of emptiness. Yeah, the subject of emptiness. So we've had teachings on it and done meditations on it and had discussions on it. So it's kind of around that area. What is the self? What is the I? Does it exist the way we think or not? So we're just looking at it here in a kind of brief way, but according to Buddhism, this is the basic cause of all our suffering, is we don't understand our own nature, our own existence, how we exist, how the I exist, how others exist. And so it's very important to investigate that, look into that, investigate that. So the next sentence says, meditating on both the third and the fourth attributes counteracts the fourth distorted conception that true dukkha are a self. So, the fourth distorted conception was believing these aggregates of my body and mind is some kind of a self, either a permanent, unitary, independent self, or a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. So there's actually different layers of a sense of self, a sense of I. And the idea of a permanent, unitary, independent I is a very coarse one, a very gross one. And it's only certain people who have learned philosophy or religion, they would believe in that kind of a self. Not everybody, not all people believe in that kind of self. Only some people. Whereas this other one, the one we just looked at, the self-sufficient, substantially existent self, that is something everyone has. It's instinctive, inborn. Even babies have it. Even animals have it. They all have a sense of a self and I existing somewhere in my body and mind, controlling my body and mind, trying to defend myself, protect myself from others, imposing myself on others, and so on. So this is something everyone has. And we need to investigate to see if it's true or not. And then one Buddhist school, the Madhyamika Prasangika school, they recognize an even more subtle misconception of self, of I, and that is the inherently existing or independently existing self or I. And that's even more subtle, more ingrained or instinctive, very, very deep inside of us. And there's a lot of discussion among the different Buddhist schools if such a self exists or not. And some say it does. There is, inherent existence. But the Prasangikas say, no, there's no inherent existence. So it gets very complicated. I think you may have studied this. I don't know who was your teacher for that class, going through the different philosophical schools in Buddhism. It's not easy and takes time. But anyway, according to the next paragraph says, according to the Prasangika's unique view, this is Madhyamika Prasangika who teach emptiness. They say that the fourth distorted conception actually involves grasping all phenomena, not just the self, but everyone and everything else, grasping all phenomena whatsoever as inherently existent. So inherently existing means existing on its own, from its own side, independent of all other phenomena, causes, conditions, parts, and also mental labeling. So we have this misconception about all phenomena. They all exist that way. They have their own intrinsic essence and exist under their own power, independent of all other factors. Okay, so that's the Prasangika school. They have a different way of explaining the fourth attribute and also the third. They say the third attribute also refers to grasping inherent existence. But I don't want to go into that. That's a bit complicated now. So that's just a brief look at those four attributes about true dukkha, which includes our own self, our I, our body, our mind, and all other conditioned things in samsara. These are all considered true dukkha or unsatisfactoriness, and these are four characteristics of them. So the next point in the book says the 5 aspects of impermanence from Asanga, great Indian master. And we did a meditation on these last week. So I think they're not very complicated. They're kind of self-explanatory. They're just 5 different ways of looking at impermanence, which I thought could be helpful for you to look at. Because impermanence is something very important. It's easier to understand than emptiness and selflessness. Those are much more difficult. But impermanence is relatively easy to understand, and yet it's still very profound, very important to understand. It's a reality, it's there. And if we don't look at it, we don't think about it, we don't understand it, then we can get ourselves into a lot of problems, such as attachment, and then being very upset and disappointed when things we're attached to change or fall apart or go away or die. And also getting angry and hostile at anyone who threatens the things we're attached to. And then we may get into doing harmful actions as a result of that. So not being aware of and not accepting impermanence gets us into a lot of trouble and also perpetuates our existence in samsara. So I think it's a good place to start, to be more aware of impermanence, the impermanence of our body, our mind, all the things around us, and so on. And by understanding impermanence, being more aware of impermanence, that will in turn gradually help us when it comes to the self, our sense of self, our sense of I, and helps to loosen those conceptions. So let's skip down to the last paragraph on page 15. it's a conclusion about these four attributes. In conclusion, based on not knowing the four attributes of true dukkha, the four distorted conceptions arise in our minds one after the other. Okay, so thinking things are permanent, that they are satisfactory, they are wonderful, and that they have a self. These arise in our mind, and they give rise to afflictions, and that in turn instigates disturbing mental, verbal, and physical actions, or karma. And those in turn leave karmic seeds on our mind streams. Some of these karmic seeds ripen at the time of death and cause our next rebirth. Others ripen in our future lives, affecting our environments, habits, and the experiences we encounter. So when we create karma, then it's usually under the influence of these mistaken, distorted conceptions. And because of that, then the karma leads to future experiences in samsara. Some of them may be pleasant experiences, some of them painful, but it's still samsara. We're still perpetuating our samsaric existence. This is the meaning of being under the control of afflictions and polluted actions or contaminated actions. And it clearly illustrates that we are not free to experience the joy and fulfillment we seek. So we must understand the four distorted conceptions well in order to overcome them. Just as in ordinary warfare, one has to learn about one's enemies in order to overcome them. So when two groups of people are at war with each other, they need to have a lot of intelligence, and they use spies to invent, to find out about the other side and what they're planning to do and what kind of weapons they're building and so on and so forth, so that they can fight them better. So in a similar way, we are kind of at war with certain aspects of our own mind that are mistaken, that are incorrect, and that are causing us suffering, keeping us in a situation of suffering again and again. So it's very important that we understand these mistaken aspects of our mind, so that then we can deal with them wisely, instead of just following them and allowing them to rule our lives and create problems for ourselves and others. Then it goes on to say, reflecting on the four attributes of true dukkha makes us yearn to be free from our polluted aggregates and to attain nirvana, a true state of freedom. So somebody who really learns these, studies these, meditates on these, will come to that conclusion. I want to be free from all these problems with my polluted body and mind, and I want to attain the state of freedom, nirvana. The practice of the four establishments of mindfulness is one way to realize the four attributes of true dukkha and to overcome the four distorted conceptions. Mindfulness on the body overcomes holding it as attractive. Mindfulness on feelings overcomes seeing the aggregates as pleasurable and desirable. Mindfulness on the mind counteracts grasping a permanent, unitary, independent self. And mindfulness on phenomena leads us to understand selflessness. The realization of subtle emptiness and subtle selflessness frees us from the bonds of cyclic existence. So in the Wednesday class, we're learning about these four establishments of mindfulness. So far, we've only gotten into the body, the first one, mindfulness on the body. But still, with that practice of mindfulness of the body, we can go a long way in overcoming distorted conceptions about our body, like thinking it's permanent, thinking it's uh, fully pleasurable and satisfying, that it's beautiful and wonderful, attractive, pure, and that there's some kind of self within this body. Okay, so the next paragraph says, why does true dukkha receive so much attention? Buddhist teachings talk so much about dukkha, suffering. It would be so much more pleasant to think of light, love, and bliss. This is what a lot of people want to do when they do meditation or read spiritual teachings, study spiritual teachings. They just want to hear about beautiful things. But however, encouraging us to contemplate dukkha is the best way for the Buddha to shake us from our complacency so that we will take advantage of our amazing opportunity to practice the Dharma. Just as a person won't seek freedom if he's unaware he is imprisoned or if he thinks prison is a comfortable environment, we will not seek liberation from cyclic existence without a clear awareness of what it is and why it is unsatisfactory. When we deeply meditate on the above topics, we will turn away from the prison of samsara and pursue the path to nirvana. So that's the reason why there's so much focus on dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. We need to recognize it so that we wake up and realize the situation we are in is not perfect, wonderful, fantastic, and generate the wish to be free from it, to emerge from this situation, find real freedom, real peace, real happiness. Okay, so the next section I'm going to skip over. I think it's self-explanatory. It's just reminding ourselves of how we have this human life with many opportunities to develop ourselves spiritually, transform our minds, and that not everyone in the world has such an opportunity that we have, and so we really need to make good use of it, wise use of it, not just for ourselves, but also to benefit others. And the bottom line, even, you don't have to become a Buddhist and accept the whole Buddhist worldview and practices and so on, but at least try to use our life wisely and compassionately, refrain from doing harmful actions, try to do constructive, beneficial actions as much as possible. So there's a lot in Buddhism that can help us to do that. So let's skip over to next page, in the middle of page 17, the paragraph that starts with all this talk about dukkha. We may mistakenly believe that Dharma practitioners must relinquish all their usual activities that bring them happiness, and that there is no happiness until we reach nirvana. This is not the case at all. In fact, it is important to have a happy mind while we practice the Dharma. As we go deeper into practice, we realize there are many types and levels of happiness and pleasure. Having food, shelter, clothing, medicine, and friends bring us some well-being, enough that we can practice the Dharma without being in dire suffering, which would make practice difficult. As we practice more, we discover the pleasant, relaxed feelings that come from improving our concentration and the internal peace arising from living ethically. As we lessen our attachment and open our hearts to others, the joy derived from connecting with others on a heart level and helping them brings us a sense of fulfillment that is greatly superior to any sense pleasure that money and possessions can afford. So this is saying that we do need to be happy in our life. And there's different kinds of happiness, different levels of happiness. There's sense happiness, sense pleasures, which we do need to a certain extent, but there's more there's deeper and more satisfying forms of happiness, like helping others, being a kind person, living ethically, and so on. And then through meditation, especially when we develop concentration and wisdom, we can achieve even higher forms of happiness. So that was the topic of the first thing we looked at, the 4 kinds of happiness. So it's good to try to achieve higher and more pure forms of happiness and not just be stuck on the first level of sensory pleasure. And then at the bottom of the page, there's just a little box there talking about the 8 pillars of joy. So this is something you could look into if you're interested. There's this book called The Book of Joy, about a week-long meeting between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, where they discussed.
We had a retreat on this book, the last one.
You had a retreat
with the Venerable
Amy.
With Amy Miller.
Amy Miller.
Oh, great. So you're familiar with the 8 Pillars of Joy. Yeah. So anyway, that's a really wonderful book with lots of advice on how to have less suffering, anxiety, stress, and more joy. Is it in Hebrew? Has it been translated?
Yes.
It's in Hebrew.
Yes.
Oh, good. That's good. Yeah, I hope this will benefit many people.
No.
Okay, so
You finished.
next time we'll move on to the second truth of true origins, the true causes of dukkha, and look at how we can work on those, how we can create less suffering for ourselves and more happiness. Okay, so we'll stop there for today, and I'll send you an email with pages I'd like you to read for next week. And then we'll meet again on Wednesday virtually.
So what do we read?
I will send you an email. I'll send you an email, okay? For next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's just take a moment to mentally dedicate the positive energy from the session, learning about the Buddha's teachings with the wish to benefit as many people and beings as possible. So let's share this merit with all living beings. May it bring them freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering. May it help them generate genuine peace and happiness.